In America, there is a charity called Ronald McDonald House, in French, La Maison de Ronald McDonald. This organization is responsible for finding homes for families with sick children who are in the hospital. It seems pretty innocent and caring, doesn't it? Well, there's another side to this organization, a much darker side that few people have heard about. The other Ronald McDonald House buildings, these houses are present in most major cities. However, you won't find these buildings by looking for them, because they don't have any address, there's no sign on their doors, and you won't even find a window there. No, the only way to find these buildings is if someone takes you there. And that's how I found them. I never knew my real parents. I've moved between foster homes in Detroit since I was a kid. Right now, I'm 15 years old and I'm what you'd call a troubled teen. I always get into trouble, and they keep putting me with good-hearted people who think they can help. But, of course, I always manage to prove to them that they won't succeed. My social worker sat on the other side of the black metal table, an expression of weariness and fatigue on her face. A thick brown envelope sat on the table between us. It was my file.
Well, it looks like your reputation has preceded you,
she said.
Now your only options are military school or Ronald McDonald House. They amazingly agreed to take you in.
I've never had the patience to put up with the sergeants yelling and waking up at 5 a.m. And besides, being in an organization named after a fast food mascot, it couldn't get any worse than that. So, I chose Ronald McDonald's house. Big black clouds were floating above me the day I got into the back of my social worker's car. As my only luggage, I had a backpack in which I had put the few belongings I owned. Among these items, I had a photo album filled with pictures of all the foster families who had taken me in. Because it was good to remember them, even if I never met their expectations.
You know, I had a few children I took care of who were taken in by the Ronald McDonald House.
My social worker told me that from the driver's seat.
Things went so well that I never needed to transfer them, and the organization took over their case.
We drove through downtown Detroit, which brought back memories. I had been kicked out of one of my foster families, because I had snuck out to go party at a downtown bar with some neighbors. Those were the good old days.
Here we are.
The car stopped slowly. I looked out the window. We got lost in front of a big grey building with no windows. It was between two industrial buildings on a small street. I noticed that there was an address on the building to my left and also on the one to my right, but none on the building in front of us. Not even a sign. "Are you sure this is the place?" I asked hesitantly. As I opened the car door to get out from the back seat, I put my backpack back on my shoulders, holding the strap tightly. Then I followed the social worker to a large metal door. She pressed the intercom and, after speaking to someone, I heard the click of the door unlocking. And we went in. As soon as the big metal door closed behind us, I noticed the unsettling silence. It was an oppressive, deafening silence. At the far end of the reception, behind a glass window, there was a secretary. She had her back to us and was typing something on the keyboard, briskly. We walked up to her. The social worker rang the little bell on the counter, and the secretary turned around quickly. Her face was made up like a clown, exactly like Ronald McDonald. To be exact, she also had the same curly frizzy hair, and on top of that, she was wearing a white nurse's coat. The situation was hilarious and I wanted to laugh, but something was stopping me, and all of a sudden, chills ran through my whole body. Something was wrong. I watched as my social worker and the secretary talked and exchanged papers. While my social worker was signing some paperwork, the secretary was staring at me. Her smile should have been comforting and welcoming, but all I saw in her eyes was hunger. "I can't stay here," and I said firmly, "I'd rather go to military school. Please, I'm begging you."
"Well, what's wrong with my sugar?"
said the secretary, her voice slightly muffled by the glass.
"Are you afraid of clowns?"
I looked into her eager eyes as she scanned me, a hint of mischief appearing before she burst out laughing. Of course, my social worker started laughing too, and she said to me,
Come on, stop making such a big deal out of it. Would you dislike military school? And besides, I really think it's the perfect place for you."
"Yes, it will be perfect for you."
Before I could say anything else, I heard something behind me. I turned around and I saw an open door in a corner, all the way at the end of the reception, just to the left of the window behind which the secretary was sitting, but there was no one there. Just the faint light spilling into our room, dimmed by the poor lighting, until the moment when strange shadows, accompanied by the sound of distant and frightening laughter, appeared.
There it is.
Said my social worker.
Here's the welcoming committee.
As I stared at the door in horror, my fingers digging into my backpack strap, my social worker patted me on the back.
Don't worry, kid. It'll be different this time. You'll feel at home, I promise.
She turned to leave and I felt bile rise in my throat. No, you can't leave me here.
I'm sorry, but I really have to go. Besides, I've never liked clowns.
And then, without looking back, she went through the big metal door, leaving me alone in this place. I turned around to focus again on the open door, and I realized that the shadows were about to enter the room where I was. Their laughter was now deafening and echoed in the lobby. I ran to the metal door, pounding and shouting repeatedly. I called for help, hoping that my social worker or anyone else would come to save me, but nothing worked. So, I went back to the secretary and saw that she was still looking at me, smiling, and that's when they came in. A whole group of male and female nurses, just like the secretary. They had the same kind of makeup and the same short red hair. Thanks to the dim light that lit up the reception, I managed to see that they had metal tools in their hands. And the group of nurses in the back was pulling a metal table with straps. "Don't come near me, damn it!" And I was shouting as I started banging on the metal door again. "Let me out!" They surrounded me, grabbed me forcefully, while I was struggling and screaming at the top of my lungs. They kept laughing while I was trying to break free. They then released me onto the metal table and strapped me down with the belts. I looked around me. There were so many of them. "Let me go!" I screamed while struggling to break free from the tight straps holding me to the table. Then the table started to roll, and they pushed me through the door that was not far from the secretary. Then they pushed me into a long white hallway that seemed to have no end. The whole time they were pushing me, I could hear them laughing over and over again. And they waved their little scalpels and other needles right next to my face, as if to make me scream even louder than I already was. They seemed to find it hilarious. The last thing I remembered, just before one of them injected me with something. It was Hans. Hands covered in gloves, inspecting my mouth and pulling at the corners of my lips, as if trying to force me to smile. Tears were streaming down my cheeks, while I could smell the foul odor of their breath in my nostrils. "No." Then, the next moment, they whispered to me, one after another, "We love to see you smile." And I started to lose consciousness, and their laughter started to slow down and turned into a kind of distant echo. When I regained consciousness, I was blinded by the light right above me. Jay, shielding my still sleepy eyes from the fluorescent light, I turned to the side and looked around. I was in a cell. It was surrounded by tall white walls and covered with scratch marks and stains. I noticed a small hole in the room's corner, which I assumed was the toilet, and a door with no window. And on the floor, right next to it, was my backpack. I tried to sit up. My body was aching, and as soon as I straightened up, I started to see blurry. I wondered what he drugged me with. Then I realized I was trembling. Looking down, I realized I wasn't even wearing my own clothes. Instead, I was wearing a dirty yellow hospital gown, covered with lots of patterns showing Ronald McDonald's head. And underneath, I was naked. I began hearing muffled sounds from elsewhere in the building that sounded like screams. I tried to stand up, but I couldn't keep my balance. My vision was starting to clear up, but my body still wasn't responsive. I got on my knees and crawled to my backpack. When I got to the door, I tried to open it, but of course it was locked. So I opened my backpack, and the only thing left inside was the photo album. They had taken my diary, my pens, and my phone, which wasn't surprising. I opened the photo album. But inside, instead of the pictures where I forced myself to smile with the former members of my foster families, I discovered something horrifying. They looked like photos straight out of crime scenes. And in each of the photos, I recognized several members of my various foster families, brutally murdered and covered in blood. My heart started racing and my stomach turned. I started flipping through the pages faster and faster. And on each one, there was a new photo and a new carnage. I recognized everyone's faces and the inside of the different houses. I had lived with all these people, and now they were all dead. When I got to the last pages, I saw a picture of a house taken at night, then one of a window of that house. Then a picture of a hallway with an open door through which light was escaping. Then a picture of my social worker brushing her teeth in front of the bathroom mirror. Then a picture of her looking at the camera lens in horror. And finally, another picture of her in the bathtub naked, covered in blood, and restrained in a position that no human could reproduce, without having many broken bones. I turned the last page, my hands trembling, and on it, there were 5 words written, "You never existed." I got goosebumps, I threw the album on the floor, and I crawled with difficulty to the hole to vomit. They were right. By killing everyone who had known me, it's as if I no longer exist. Just as I was thinking that, I heard more muffled screams. I had to get out of here. So I went back to my backpack, and I prayed that he hadn't found my secret weapon. I opened the small front pocket, reached to the bottom, scratched the fabric, and pulled out the pins I'd hidden in the seam. Then I pressed my face against the door and listened. I could hear footsteps getting closer. But suddenly they turned around. I had to act quickly. I moved the handle with one hand and fiddled with the lock pins using the other. I was surprised how quickly I unlocked the door. Holding onto the handle, I slowly stood up, finally managing to stand on my feet. So I took the opportunity to crack the door open. A clown nurse walked right by. I almost had a heart attack, but luckily he didn't notice me and kept walking quickly. I slowly poked my head through the door, and on both sides, endless white stretched out. The screams were much louder now and seemed to be coming from all around me. Taking a deep breath, I walked down the hallway and closed the door behind me. I went right, passing doors nearly identical to those I'd just forced open. And from behind each of those doors, I could hear sobbing rising up. I stopped in front of one door in particular because inside I could hear the unbearable cries of a child. I moved the handle to see if I could open the door, but it was locked. I kept moving forward, glancing behind me from time to time to make sure no nurse would catch me. And then I walked past some double white doors and stopped for a moment. Playroom was written in large, thin letters on both doors, and of course, just like with the previous doors, I heard screams. But this time, there seemed to be several people behind it. The nurse clown's evil laughter joined the screams. I hesitated. I was afraid to find out what kind of torture those monsters were inflicting on their victims, and in the end, I decided not to find out. I kept moving forward, and I saw a symbol indicating stairs on a door right in front of me. As I opened the door, I looked behind me, and I saw 2 nurse clowns coming out of the playroom, their coats covered in blood stains. I quickly hurried toward the stairs, hoping they hadn't noticed me. The stairs weren't very well lit, the walls weren't painted, and rust stains marked the concrete. I turned around to look at the door I had just passed through, and on it there was the number 5. I was on the 5th floor, so I decided to go down to the ground floor. Each of my steps echoed in the stairwell as I went down. I couldn't hear the screams anymore, just the sound of the pipes behind the walls. That respite was welcome. I arrived in front of the door with the number 1 on it. The stairs seemed to go down for a few more floors, but I stopped in front of that door and took a look. Behind it there was another white hallway, and luckily no nurses. I started walking inside the hallway, but this time there were no screams. At the end of the hallway, just like on the 5th floor, there were double doors. A red cross was taped on it. I pressed my ear against it, and all I heard were the slow rhythmic beats of a machine. But also a faint continuous beep, like the ones you hear in a hospital. I knew I shouldn't open the door. I knew it wasn't an exit, and I knew I had to keep looking for a way to escape. But I couldn't help myself. I wanted to take a look. When I pressed the handle, I noticed that the door wasn't locked. Behind it, there was a white room. The light bulbs were flickering strangely, and I immediately noticed that a lot of wires were hanging around the room and at the end of those wires that were coming down from the ceiling. There were children, many children, who were wearing the same gown as me. They were tied to white crosses hanging from the wires, as if they had been crucified. They were terribly silent, their heads drooping forward, their eyes either closed or open, staring into the void. Some seemed to move a little, but most were completely motionless. The crosses they were planted on swayed gently back and forth. That's when I noticed that what I had taken for wires weren't actually wires. They were intravenous tubes, connected to the wrists of each of the children. These tubes were pumping their blood. I almost threw up again. In the center of the room, among the rows of crosses, I found the source of the rhythmic sound. I saw a large glass cylinder filling with the children's blood. I tried to scream and cry out in rage, but what I saw next chilled me to the bone so much that I couldn't do anything. In the big glass cylinder, in which there were liters and liters of blood, I saw him, Ronald McDonald. He was floating in the blood, and his head was sticking out slightly. He started to smile gently and looked me straight in the eyes. Then, slowly he raised a hand, and there he gently tapped on the glass. All of a sudden, I heard alarms going off all around me. The sound of the sirens was piercing. It was certain now they had discovered my disappearance. When I started running to reach the stairwell, I heard glass shattering behind me and a laugh so loud that it rivaled the alarms. I ran as fast as I could toward the stairs, and as soon as I got there, I also heard many laughs above me, echoing and reverberating through the stairwell. The nurse clowns arrived. I hurried down the stairs, descending at least 3 floors to the basement. Then I ran through a dark hallway that resembled a sewer. The smell of decay and rotting flesh was becoming more and more unbearable. As I kept running, the laughter behind me only grew louder. I managed to glance back and saw that several of them were chasing me. Because of the dim lighting, I could only make out their silhouettes, their smiles, and their tools that reflected faintly. I passed by recesses where mountains of decomposing bodies were stored. I couldn't stop and only cared about my own survival. I turned a corner in the hallway and came to a metal ladder on the wall. I climbed it, until my head bumped into something. It was a heavy metal hatch. Below me the laughter was getting closer, and the footsteps were louder. They were near, and I knew it. I shoved the hatch with all my strength. Panting and screaming, the horrible clowns had arrived below me, and they were brandishing their torture instruments. I felt something cut my leg, which made me scream and push even harder. And finally, after long and painful efforts, the trapdoor finally opened. I got out quickly and slammed the trapdoor shut behind me. I couldn't hear them anymore. Titles, Jeremy. I was outside. The raindrops falling in that place gently landed on my face. I looked around me. I was surrounded by abandoned buildings with broken windows and no light coming out. There were no cars either, and no sign of life. In the distance, I heard police sirens that quickly faded away. A sharp pain ran through my leg. The place where the clown nurse had touched me was bleeding heavily. Limping, I started to walk.
Hey!
But the only answer I got was the sound of thunder.
Help me! I'm begging you!
I felt my foot sink into something soft and slimy. I looked down. It was a soaked newspaper so wet that the ink was starting to disappear. But I managed to read the date. July 13, 1992. A strange feeling ran through my body, but I kept walking.
Can anyone hear me? Please help me! Please.
After a while, my cries turned into sobs. I stopped, and the rain kept pouring down on my thin blouse. I was shivering from the cold, and then I saw a light in the distance. It was a huge Mr. John. It was coming from a McDonald's. I don't know why, but something pushed me to go that way. When I arrived in front of the McDonald's, I saw that apart from the sign, the rest of the restaurant was plunged into darkness. I cautiously moved toward the restaurant's broken windows, and I tried to see through the darkness. I looked to my right and saw the play structure that all the kids knew. And next to it, the famous bench that everyone knows, the one with the statue of Ronald McDonald. You know, the one where you can sit next to the statue. It made it seem like Ronald was putting his arm around our shoulders. I shivered when I saw it, but at least that one didn't look real. The windows of the building were broken and the doors were unlocked. So I went back inside to shelter from the rain. Everything was silent and dark. I noticed that the decor didn't look like a modern McDonald's, but more like what you would see in the 80s or 90s. As I moved forward, I noticed something placed on the counter, a black rectangle. I got closer and saw that it was an almost brand new laptop. Yes, a laptop. In the 1990s. I started laughing hysterically. Then I grabbed it, and I went back to sit next to the statue of Ronald. I opened the laptop and started writing this story, hoping that someone would come across it. I don't know where I am, nor even if everything I'm experiencing right now is real. Absolutely, nothing makes sense. I hope everything I write will be read eventually. Did I really get out of that place? Or am I now one of those people hanging from the grey crosses? I'll probably never know about the ones I saw on the first floor. Rain falls on the keyboard, but I don't care. All I can do is write. Anyway, I don't know how much time I have left, because I notice Ronald watching everything I write out of the corner of my eye. I can even hear him sometimes quietly laughing. And all that's left for me to do is to join him and laugh with him.